Welcome back to the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. I'm Ben Salzman.
And I'm Millie Beetham.
Today, we're thrilled to have Gene Grosser, the Chief Business Officer at Stripe, on the podcast. Gene brings expertise in business strategy and innovation to our discussion, and together, we explore how Stripe is at the forefront of transforming financial technology and reshaping the landscape of online payments.
Gene shares insights into her role at Stripe, her learnings from years of amazing go-to-market work, and her visionary approach to integrating AI at Stripe to enhance customer experiences. Here's our conversation with Gene.
Welcome to the latest episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. We have a very special guest today. Gene DeWitt Grosser is the Chief Business Officer at Stripe and one of my longest running friends and mentors. And so very excited to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
I am doing fabulously.
It's great to have you. As intro for any of you longtime listeners from the Ground Truth Dog Patch days, Gene was the first guest ever on our previous podcast, which is about 4 years ago. And I have mentioned this story to you before, but we basically did that podcast with like 3 days left before COVID hit.
Yep.
And it's been a long time since we have you on, but tell us, what's the latest? Tell us about you and sort of introduce yourself for the audience.
Yeah, awesome. So like Ben mentioned, Stripe's Chief Business Officer. Been with Stripe for 8 years. Grew up sort of first decade of my career at Google, was the Chief Revenue Officer at Dialpad, and then came over to Stripe originally to really grow out the sales organization. So joined in 2016 when there were all of 10 people selling at Stripe, about 400 people at the company. Spent 7 years growing that out, adding all the other functions you'd want in go-to-market, sales development, solution architects, customer success, integration engineers, et cetera, taking us from a company that mostly sold to a Series B startup into, starting to sell into enterprise, et cetera. And then just over a year ago, moved into this role, which is a little bit of a unique role. At fintechs, your partnerships are pretty existential to what you do. So if you think of what Stripe does, we work with banks all over the planet, major card networks like a Visa or MasterCard, major tech players like an Apple and a Google, payment methods around the world, and we're basically wrapping our software around that. But the product of Stripe doesn't actually exist without any of those underlying partners. And so my organization does all of our global partnerships around the world, and really ends up being kind of like a top, middle, and bottom line driver of a lot of Stripe's P&L.
Yeah, I can't wait. We're going to dive into all things BD and talk about sort of differences in your world as it relates to previous running a big team and go-to-market. But let's talk a little bit about just Stripe in general.
Yep.
Give us the once-over on since we talked last. How has the company changed? Obviously, you've gotten a lot bigger and doing more and more, but talk to us about the change, and now we're at this new beautiful HQ in South San Francisco.
Yep. Between 4 years ago, there have been a bunch of things that have really shifted. So if I think of one of the things that's been most compelling to me about Stripe is a lot of companies do an awesome job of Act 1 and sort of growing their initial product line. But if you're going to go be one of the largest companies on the planet, typically that means you need to be capable of, at a minimum, moving into another segment, moving into another geography, or adding another really meaningful product line. And actually very few companies on the planet can do any of those three. And Stripe, I would argue, has done all of those three in the last 4 years. So we've gone from being a company that mostly sold into startups to being one that's selling into some of the largest enterprises on the planet. We've gone from, being mostly a U.S. and kind of core Europe focus to being in over 50 countries around the world. And then we've gone from, being a payments company to having a very large software offering now that's, in the multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of ARR. And so much so that actually at sessions last week, we announced that we're now going to decouple payments from our software, which isn't something you would have thought a payments company would ever do.
Okay.
I think we reopened it in October of 2022, it's like the COVID stuff still blends together, but whenever like people were starting to be like, okay, things aren't shut down, it opened. We, about a month or so ago, sort of moved into more of a return to work phase or return to office phase. So now we're coming in 50% of the days. South San Francisco is a little far away for those of us living in Marin, but the office is beautiful, as has always been the case for offices at Stripe. And I've got to say, like, there's just a ton of energy when you're here in person.
Let's talk about life as CBO, right? You talked a little bit about what biz dev means. Talk to us about your day-to-day and how you think about running the org, and maybe how you think about running the org as related to go-to-market. What's different? What's the same? What are some of the things that sort of carried over versus like, I had to learn this brand new?
Maybe it's probably useful to understand, the partnerships org at Stripe really is mostly doing product partnerships, right? So like everything we're doing is a partnership with a company that fundamentally enables the product we ultimately bring to market to exist. A lot of these are also very large commercial relationships. Like in some of these cases, we're exchanging hundreds of millions of dollars of value. There's a lot that's not dissimilar from sales. When I was thinking about moving into this role, I remember at the time the woman this was going to report into, I was like, so I've looked at the job description and like half of it, I think like I totally map to. And then the other half I'll have to learn, but I think I can, pick it up. So the half that like mapped from go to market is there's a lot of it that closely mirrors like very complex enterprise account management, like global account sales. Like if you take our relationship with Visa, massive commercial agreement. You've got it across numerous lines of business. We've got account teams here in EMEA, in APAC, et cetera. So you've got a lot of that where that just sort of pulls through from having done that in sales. There's actually a lot of best practices in sales that I've felt I could bring through. So I do think well-run sales organizations, like you have really good processes around account planning. On the CSM side, health scores, how you think about relationship mapping. And so actually a lot of what I did in this role in the first year was almost like take the aspects of the sales playbook that work here, and a lot of them were the same, and bring them over. And so we've sort of stood up a lot of that sales operating cadence that you would expect to see, in a well-run global accounts type team. Where it's different, although I'd say has some overlaps with companies that are startups that are selling, is I actually roll up into our product organization. Yep. So, when a product manager goes out and is, writing their, vision doc, much less a design doc, they're often coming to my organization to be like, here's what we think we want to create, but we need partner XYZ to do it. Can you help us figure out what that would be, what it implies as far as like what they would be able to do or not do relative to what we want them to do, so on and so forth. So, and because payments is really interesting because we're at the intersection of financial services and technology, often where the industry outside of Stripe is headed really implicates the products you'll be able to build. Right. And so there are a lot of ways in which our team is also being like, this is where this is going, this is the future, given that, what should we build over here? Yeah. So that's been different and something I personally enjoyed as sort of like a product-oriented sales leader previously. Yeah.
And give us like some specific examples, right? I can imagine Visa and some of the big banks, clearly there's a lot of sort of infrastructure there. What are like, from a day-to-day perspective, like give us an example of the types of projects without obviously specifics that are not public, but the types of, how did like your day-to-day, like I imagine there's a lot of like really intense meetings with big groups of people on both sides, but like, it's very different than just like customer after customer and management in the GTM world.
It's really, it is a mix. I do a fair amount that is externally facing that honestly doesn't feel that different from sales. So a good example would be Visa is obviously one of Stripe's largest partners. like, we will do an all-day QBR and summit in person with them. You would have done the same thing, at a well-run sales organization with one of your biggest customers, right? Yep. So that type of stuff is happening all the time. You deal with escalations and things that crop up. Either there's an incident, one of the products down. So the other thing that's actually interesting about the product I run is it's not just BD, it's partner operations. It's the risk function for partnerships, which is a little bit unique to a fintech space relative to most software companies. But so I sort of have partnerships soup to nuts. So if some bank is having an outage on their end that's causing an outage here, my team's at the forefront of that. If we, have accidentally onboarded somebody we shouldn't have onboarded as a customer, they're like a restricted business,
your customer stuff.
That type of stuff, like we're going to have to go and sort that out. So you have those types of things that come up. And then there's a lot that is like what I was just saying, like around product visioning, or also like the other thing that's interesting is like, let's say product wants to bring a new product to market. We need these partners for it. Like, we're going out to run that RFP. I got to say, it's like fun being on the opposite side of the table. But so like, we're going out to run the RFP, we're negotiating. It's still tough. You're on the other side of the table, but like you do want a good deal. Yeah. And you've got to get your negotiation timelines to line up with the product timeline so you don't block them. So, and there are a lot of times where like what the product does out of the box is not really what we wanted it to do for ours. Mm-hmm. So you're, trying to get them to change roadmaps, figure out commercials, go through legalese, et cetera, but do that in a way where like we never once slow down product velocity.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost a product role that happens to involve a ton of partnership stuff.
Yeah, I really do and I think that's a little bit unique to fintech because again, like the product at Stripe doesn't exist without the partner. That like, I do really actually feel like one of the awesome things about working in this role is like you do shape the ultimate, product that we bring to market.
Let's talk a little bit about Stripe Sessions. I was there last week. It was an amazing conference. You all did an awesome job putting it on. You had this big session. It was basically like keynote from Patrick, straight to Gene. Were you nervous? Like, how did you feel like it went? And then maybe just a little bit of a look back on the conference generally.
Yeah. I definitely, that was the first time I've been in front of 5,000 plus people. But it ended up once you get out there, we did a bunch of rehearsals before. Knew my content, and you can't actually see 5,000 people.
Just lights,
so
right?
It's mostly lights. Yeah. And then interestingly enough, like I actually, a guy who used to work for me at Stripe, he's now at another startup, he was sitting in the front row. And in the first 30 seconds, I was like, is that Kevin? So I'm up there, trying to remember what I'm supposed to say and being like, it's great. I haven't seen Kevin for a year. So it just kind of like instantly calms you down. Nice. And then, I also had, mine was sort of like this dual fireside chat thing. So you've got other humans up there on stage with you. They're people I know and work with all the time. And so, it's easy to talk to people, Yeah.
Let's switch gears to talk more on the product side, right? AI is clearly like, it's almost trite to bring it up because it's everywhere all the time, but it's there for a reason. You all, I think, have been as early as anyone on this, right? It was sort of like right next to the foundational models as leaders in this space.
Yep.
It feels like there's a huge amount of implications for payments, finance, Stripe in general.
Yeah.
Let's just talk through at the very highest level, how should folks think about how AI touches this world? And then I'm assuming like me and everyone else, you've had to be like, okay, like let me go figure out what this all means. So maybe just first how it impacts your world and then your personal journey to ramping up on it.
So Stripe, it just hits across so many facets of the business, and we can get into a lot of them. So, one of the most obvious ones that I think most folks have been early to implement, we actually talked about this on stage with Klarna, was around support. Mm-hmm. And Stripe just gets a huge amount of support inquiries. Like money is arguably one of the things people, get most uppity about. And so if anything's going wrong, they're going to contact you. And so, we're now able to use AI to not only increase the, how quickly we can get back, but actually accuracy of response. So make it both a better experience for customers while also saving money. So that's sort of one, place where we've been able to use it. Sort of next place we're using it in a number of facets. It's not dissimilar from what others are doing, is sort of like AI-izing, a thing you were already doing to make it better. So like lots of examples of this would be, just being able to do natural language prompts for things you're doing. So Stripe's had a reporting product called Sigma for a long time, but to use it, you actually really needed to know SQL. Now you can literally put, how many customers did I acquire yesterday, and how does that compare to this date last year? And it'll spit out the answer.
Wow.
So you've got those buckets. Stripe. Then sort of there's another bucket that I think is, more unique to financial services, which is like you just deal with at scale a bunch of things that actually lend themselves really well to AI. So fraud, that was one we talked about with Visa on stage, and some of the work both of us were doing around AI, because we actually think the fraud vectors will change materially, like actually become sophisticated and more sophisticated and fundamentally different. But you can apply a lot of AI there, and then know your customer, know your business, where like it's actually not easy to, when someone fills out your sign up form on the web, to like truly validate that that is a legitimate business. Right. And there's a huge problem actually with like false positives and false negatives in each direction. And we're finding that LLMs do far better job of figuring out, is this legit? Because whereas a human probably would look at maybe 2 pages on their website to try to figure out what they're doing, an LLM can look at all of it. They can look at all of it, and they can figure out whether or not they have a LinkedIn profile. They can figure out on the LinkedIn profile, do they have lots of followers? Like, those types of things. And so we're actually seeing LLMs outperform really even humans in figuring out whether or not a business is legit. And then Stripe, we processed $1 trillion in 2023. So you can imagine we have a lot of proprietary data. Yep. And so I think we shared at Sessions also that we're starting to build our own foundational models. Yep. And then maybe lastly, also thinking through the commerce could be fundamentally different, really, when you get into more AI native applications. So, agent-based commerce, where like I'm no longer, going out and shopping. I'm just sort of saying, hey Siri, I'd like some red shoes. Go find me some and pay for them. Yep.
I guess one of the things that I noticed as soon as Anthropic and OpenAI are like lots of Stripe people going over there. Talk to us about your sort of like experience watching all of your friends and colleagues sort of file into these two companies and compete against each other. Yeah. And what's just like, must be watching with like popcorn. That's like, wow, what's gonna happen here?
Lots of good dinners.
Yes.
No, it's been fun. I mean, if you think about what OpenAI and Anthropic are doing, a lot of their business model, like I don't think you could have a better training ground than Stripe was. It's an API, it's consumption based, it's an executive level sale, it's an extremely complicated product. And that translates well to AI. So I think that's sort of why you've seen that movement there. We definitely miss all of them. Yes. Happy to have any of them back. Yes. But no, it's great. Like I think it's nice to see Stripe folks go on and prosper outside of Stripe, and I think there are a lot of things that we were doing within the Stripe sales organization that were pretty unique as far as how we thought about our sales process, how we thought about the culture, how we thought about compensation design, all those types of things. And it certainly makes me happy if like the next generation of sales organizations maybe look a little bit more like what Stripe's was.
Let's talk about the latest in data-driven go-to-market. Obviously, you're not in this world anymore. I'm spending a lot of time with your team these days on this, so I have some thoughts as well. But when AI first started to emerge, like customer success, customer service, sales, marketing are obvious places where this is going to land and work really well. What were the things that sort of popped to your head as first of like, oh, well, this is going to change or that's going to change?
Well, like we started off this podcast talking about the Dog Patch podcast that you and I did together. And I do think that like, even though things have advanced, like if you actually went and like listened to that podcast, like what we were talking about would still be relatively novel today.
Totally. Unfortunately.
But yes, unfortunately. But like, okay, so the vision at the time, what like I was so fired up about, Ben and I were we're working on was like, effectively we're going to develop this company universe. And you can think of this as like the world's largest, spreadsheet where every row would be a different company and every column would be an attribute about that company that might help you figure out what to say or sell to them. And then you can imagine developing a lot of content that was like basically Mad Libs, where then a computer could pick what to put in the blank on the basis of like the company universe. And so it was effectively going to get you to like mass customization of like you could write 1,000 outbound emails, all of which would be slightly different than the one before, and feel like an SDR had written them when really they hadn't. And so like get a lot more throughput. Also as a company, give you a lot more control over brand because you're not actually letting 100 different people choose how to write them, et cetera. And I think we were just like a little early, which it turns out like that database is hard to create. Yes. Like getting the data to be clean, accurate, and representative of the company and its attributes, hard. And actually, I think now AI will let that happen.
Yes.
And so everything that we were attempting to do to automate, like now if you just were smart enough about, dumping the right set of spreadsheets and prompts into an LLM, it actually ought to spit out what we were trying to do 4 years ago.
Totally.
So I'm a huge believer that like AI is going to enable mass customization on everything from sales development and through the sales process. I know internally we're using AI a lot right now just in like a sales assistant behind the scenes of like, we've dumped all of our content in it, all of our case studies, everything we have on segmentation. And so now you can sort of go LLM or there's a variant internally and sort of be like, okay, I'm selling to this customer with these thoughts. Like, how should I do this?
Yeah. How do you think it plays out for the SDR model? Like if let's play it out 1 year and 5 years.
1 year, it feels like the email aspect ought to be rather automatable in line with what we were talking about. And so hopefully it's sort of interesting. Like I feel like the SDR function has gone through this like transformation over the years of like once upon a time it was like hardcore cold calling function, right? And then we all figured out email. And SDRs kind of stopped picking up the phone for a period. And so maybe on the 1 year basis, it's like SDRs get on the phone again because the machine's going to do the email, which you've been hiding behind, for the last 5 years. And then at a certain point, if you believe that a bot that might sound like a human and could take an actual phone call, that it could go there. Because I think where you see the best SDRs add the most value actually typically is in objection handling or on the fly discovery of asking the question because that person said this.
It does feel like you're so right that we hid behind email. It was more efficient. You could do it at scale. There was all these things about it. And now it feels like we're going to switch back, partially because email will be done for us, right? Or hopefully, but also because cold calling was like a point of pride of like, I can take someone from cold to not cold. Yeah. And now it's like warm calling, right? Yeah. Like if you have all this context and you know everything happening and all the temporal data, it should be a lot easier to call. So hopefully it sort of comes back.
Well, the other like hashtag crazy idea I have, or it's not crazy idea, but like the thing, we actually debated this maybe a decade ago when I was at Google, and it did not play out this way, but I could see where now it would, was like, as a lot of these tools became more efficient, more widespread, our assumption was at a certain point, email will be a very ineffective way to do outbound prospecting because the average recipient will get 20 of them a day. And so it's basically all spam, like you're just not going to open anything ever. And so the question was, what will be the channel that gets you in front of that prospect's eyes, gets them to open to engage? So that might be the other big thing that we see on like a 3 to 5 year time horizon is actually, at first we'll all get excellent at doing email perfectly. And then because now 100x the number of companies can do email really well that couldn't even attempt it before, it actually won't work. And so then it's going to have to be something different that gets you that initial foot in the door.
Totally. I mean, to your point, it feels like content broadly, if it's static content or if it's sort of even like semi-involved content, it'll be like, yeah, of course someone could produce that blog post or that audio file or that video. Like every version of every piece of media, it will be much more around like interactivity, live, real time, verified. Like there will be sort of the bar will go up on content to like, is this bringing me in a way I haven't felt before? Because your customized video, everyone can do, right? Yeah. Oh, it's going to change a lot. We're seeing it every day. And I think, just to your point around the people versus the human, we have a similar thing to what you described where we pulled in all of our first-party data and our third-party data together. So like all the data that I just showed plus CRM data and product usage. And we have this thing called Account AI where I can chat with the CRM and just ask questions of it. And it has this button that says, tell me the latest on the account and what the next steps are. So my new thing, which is like so rude to the AMs, shout out to the AMs, we love you, is I record. One side of the screen is asking that exact same question to the human and then to the bot of like, what's going on in this account and what are the next steps? As you might imagine, it's not a fair fight. It's like within seconds, it's like, and it's got every conversation, every last thing that's changed and happened. And the other person's like just tying their shoes. I'm like, so the latest is, and I'm like, no, I'm done. We're good.
Well, maybe the benefit of all of this is that salespeople finally start using CRM.
Totally, yes. And to your point, like I've gone from a world in which I basically go and ask my biz dev person or my salesperson, like, hey, what's going on with this account? To what's going on with this account and what are the next steps? To basically, I'll show it to you here. Is like I literally just go, and it's got everything, like all the opportunity data, all the contacts, and so I can now go from instead of like catch me up on the things, it's like now I know all the things. Let's just talk about what to do, like what's the strategy. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it changes. Let's pivot to crypto. You had some announcements. I don't know anything about crypto, so you're gonna have to take it from the top. I know what I see on Twitter, but it feels like we're gonna take a second pass at crypto as a industry. Talk to me like a third grader. What did you all launch last week, and why is it different than the first time you all supported? You were really early to crypto 5 years ago or so.
I think it was like 10.
10. Yeah. So then you like took a break, and now we're back.
Yeah.
Talk from the top. What does it mean for Stripe?
I should definitely get Lewis, who actually does this, to do this version. He'll do it far better than I. But so, Stripe originally offered the ability to accept Bitcoin. The issue with that was actually transaction speeds are super slow. Was expensive to transact, and then obviously not a ton of people were really going and buying stuff with Bitcoin. And so we actually pulled it for a while for some of those reasons. And so basically now you have more like stable coins that are making it so that you actually can transact. These aren't just like, your Doja coin or whatever that people are using. And John demoed all of this, like transaction speeds are now lightning fast. Cost is coming down. So it's basically becoming a more viable payment method. I think the other point John made was, in the U.S., sure, like credit cards are still very easy to use, but if you're in other countries around the world where you've got a less stable environment, your currency is fluctuating, this is you see them being more popular. And so I think we're just seeing more dynamics of like, basically crypto has matured to a point to make it a viable thing that you can use. Does that mean you are IR yet? Like, no. Although our friends might be. So it's basically bringing that back. We've had for a while like fiat to crypto on ramps, so you could get your normal US dollars into crypto. So this will just enable you to now start accepting it. And we'll see where it goes.
Fascinating.
It was what was most fascinating to me is like Stripe's announcing all this cool stuff at sessions, and like I think the most tweeted by far, and maybe this is obvious, was like everything crypto. Is
that right?
Oh yeah. Like the crypto tweets had the most likes, most reshares, like trending on Twitter that day or X, whatever. Was the crypto stuff that much more than anything else that we launched.
All the Twitter people, they've 100% commitment.
Yes.
On the crypto topic, how does it impact your world on the BD side? How are you thinking about it? Is it something you're proactively bringing to partners, like, okay, now we should talk about this, or it's more like inbound, or you wait for them to come to you?
It's been It's been a mix. So I think a few years ago, actually, there were a lot of folks like, right now, every board is sort of like, what's your AI strategy? And like 3 years ago, a lot of boards were like, what's your Web3 strategy? And so we had a lot of folks coming to us. Like I remember a major, I won't use the name, but place where you can purchase expensive jewelry, right? Was trying to figure out like, okay, do we want to offer the ability to purchase your wedding ring with Bitcoin? Yeah. So that was sort of like where we were 3 years ago, was like everybody would come to you and be like, I don't really know what this is, but I'm told we should probably have a strategy. Can you tell me how I would possibly use this in my environment? Yeah. And then you sort of had crypto winter. You didn't have any of that. I think now more of the conversations are still like folks that are very much in the crypto space rather than, the jewelry use case I just gave. But, assuming things continue up and to the right as they have been, I imagine we'll go back to like, okay, it might not actually be like, what's your crypto strategy so much as like, today people come to us and say, what should be my payment method strategy, right? Like I operate in the following geos, like what should I offer? And so they might then just include that of like, hey, if you're selling in country X, Y, and Z, it also suggests that you include crypto.
Maybe let's just talk a little bit about the future for you. You obviously have this amazing job. It's an amazing company. No rush to leave, probably nothing to announce today. But where are you headed over like the 5 to 10 year horizon, and maybe where Stripe headed over the 5 to 10 year horizon?
I mean, I think the thing I've loved about working at Stripe, I've been here for 8 years, is just that it's a dynamic industry, and what Stripe is doing is just, it's complicated and often new. So I've never run out of things that I find challenging at this company to go solve. Yeah. So that combined with like, I think it's a place where if you do great work, people are really willing to take risks on you. So, like I said, with me moving into this role, I probably met half of the requirements of the JD, and then they were like, yeah, we think you can probably figure out the other half. So, I imagine there'll be this, I'm only a year into this role, so I'm quite happy to stay in it for a while, yeah. But like, there'll be a point at which I'm like, I think I want to try that thing, Yeah. And so, it's interesting to be able to do multiple tours of duty at the company. And the big thing I'm really excited about at Stripe is, this journey towards us actually being like a really major software provider. And so if you look at a lot of what we're doing now, it's really becoming a revenue growth platform more so than just a payments company. Yeah. And so I just think that's going to be a really interesting transformation to be a part of, to help drive. And then, I think in 5 years' time, we're actually running a pretty different company. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll be excited to watch what you all build. For our final question, this is our sort of like traditional last question that we ask people. Who is the smartest person you have ever met or know, and why? And maybe what did you learn from them, or how did it impact you going forward?
So I'm like the worst at superlatives. I don't like picking one. So I'm going to cheat. Yes. So I'll answer this like two ways. Way one, like objectively on intellect, like John and Patrick are two of the smartest people I have worked with. Yeah. And I just remember in particular my first year at Stripe just being in like meeting rooms with them where, I'm deep on a thing and I'm presenting my recommendation. And then you get just asked this like question where all you can do is sort of like turn your head like sideways and be like, how on earth did you know to ask that? Yes. I have thought about this for 100 hours. You have thought about it for 100 seconds, and you just asked me a question that's more insightful than I would have ever come up with. Yes. So, and then the other one, I've been really fortunate in my career to have awesome managers and sponsors. And so Claire Johnson, who was our COO, she was my boss multiple times throughout my career. And then Rich Rao was a boss of mine twice at Google. I'll highlight the two of them in that they are two of the more savvy business people and amazing operators that I have interacted with. And I think a lot of my leadership style and sort of my focus on being an operator is a derivative of sort of like the two of their best characteristics, me attempting to put them together into, one human.
Yeah, totally. Well, Jean, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for spending time with us. As you know, you're one of our favorite guests. You're welcome back anytime. And I just really appreciate you taking the time and for all that you've done for me and for your whole team over time. It's been incredible to watch your rise here at Stripe.
Yeah, awesome. It's been a pleasure. And, some of the most fun I've had at Stripe were like the war rooms that we had trying to map out all things like outbound when Stripe was trying to get comfortable with doing outbound at all.
Right.
So,
I remember when it was like, should we email people?
Yes.
Step one.
Yes. So it's been a good journey.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us for another amazing episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast. We'll look forward to having you on next time. And Jean, where can people find you if they want to keep up with everything you're doing?
Oh, man. I actually am not really on Twitter anymore. It's technically at JDeWitt29, but that won't be very productive.
But let's get it going, folks.
LinkedIn, it's just Jean DeWitt Grosser.
Awesome. Yeah. Follow Jean on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks,
Great.
Ben.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the ZoomInfo Labs podcast.
For more from ZoomInfo Labs, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me and Ben on LinkedIn and visit zoominfo.com/labs to get in touch.